The air was sharp with winter cold, the kind that cuts through even the thickest coat. On a crowded city street, people hurried past, heads down, earbuds in, bags clutched tightly, each one lost in their own world. And there, against the brick wall of a closed shop, sat a man in a worn army jacket, his back slightly hunched, his hands trembling from both the chill and exhaustion. At his feet rested a piece of cardboard, its edges bent from use, with 5 words scrawled in black marker: "Homeless veteran. Anything helps." His name was James. Not long ago, he had worn that same jacket with pride, standing tall in places most people would never dare to go. He had once been strong, fearless, someone who protected others without a second thought. But now, the world walked past him as though he were a shadow, a silent fixture blending into the pavement. Every so often, a few coins would clink into the small cup beside him, but most people avoided his eyes. To them, he was just another homeless man, another story they didn't want to hear. Yet behind the stillness of his posture was a storm of memories, a life filled with love and loss, service and sacrifice, and the unspoken hope that maybe, just maybe, someone would stop. As the daylight began to fade and the wind cut colder, James pulled his jacket tighter. Invisible in plain sight, he wondered if the world had forgotten him entirely. James closed his eyes, trying to block out the noise of the street, but the memories pushed through like waves he couldn't hold back. There was a time when his life was steady, filled with small, ordinary joys that now seemed almost impossible to imagine. He could still see his mother's kitchen, the smell of coffee in the morning, the sound of laughter spilling from the living room when his family gathered. He remembered birthdays with cake and candles, his father's proud handshake the day he enlisted, the way his little sister used to run into his arms when he came home on leave. Those moments were his anchor back then, reminders of what he was fighting for. But the war had changed him in ways no one could see. The battlefield didn't just stay overseas, it followed him home, carving itself into his mind. He carried nightmares that wouldn't fade, faces he couldn't forget, and a heaviness that grew with every silent night. Finding steady work became harder than fighting any battle. Employers saw the uniform once, but they couldn't see the man he was becoming, struggling quietly with wounds no metal could heal. Friends called less often. Family, though loving, didn't always understand. And slowly, life unraveled, piece by piece, until the couch he slept on turned into a shelter bed, and finally, the street corner became the only place left to go. Now, each day felt like survival, and every night he wondered, how had a life once so full slipped into this silence? The afternoon sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the sidewalk where James sat. Another day was passing much like the rest, faces rushing by, eyes fixed ahead, the city moving too fast to notice him. His sign lay propped against his knee, the words beginning to blur in his own tired gaze. Then, out of nowhere, a pair of small shoes stopped right in front of him. He looked up to see a little girl, no more than 8, staring at him with wide, curious eyes. She wasn't afraid. She didn't look away. In her tiny hands, she held a sandwich wrapped in foil and a bottle of water. Carefully, she knelt down so they were eye level and said softly, almost like a whisper carried by the wind, "Thank you for your service." For a moment, James couldn't speak. The words caught in his throat, a lump rising as warmth spread through the cold space in his chest. Nobody had said those words to him in years. Behind her stood her father, watching closely. He hadn't planned to stop either, but seeing his daughter kneel in front of this weary veteran stirred something inside him. James's shaking hands reached out, and when the girl placed the sandwich in his palms, he felt the weight of more than just food. It was recognition. It was dignity. It was the reminder that even in the midst of being unseen, someone had chosen to see him. And in that instant, hope flickered where despair had lived for so long. The father stepped closer, crouching down beside his daughter as James carefully unwrapped the sandwich. Instead of offering a hurried smile and walking away, he stayed. His eyes met James's, steady and unflinching, as if to say, "I see you. I hear you." For the first time in a long time, James found himself speaking, not just muttering thanks, but telling fragments of his story. About the uniform he once wore with pride. About the battles he carried home inside his head. About how quickly life can unravel when the world moves on and leaves you behind. The father listened, not with pity, but with genuine attention. And when James fell silent, expecting the familiar pause before people excused themselves, the man did something unexpected. He pulled out his phone. With one hand resting reassuringly on his daughter's shoulder, he began making calls, first to a friend who worked with a veterans outreach group, then to a shelter that had open beds. His voice was calm but firm, carrying the weight of someone determined to help. That night, James wasn't left on the street. He was guided into a warm room with a bed, clean clothes, and the first real chance at stability he'd had in years. It wasn't just shelter, it was the spark of a new beginning. Lying there, staring at the unfamiliar ceiling, he felt a quiet realization settle in his heart. All it took was one act of kindness, one stranger refusing to look away, to remind him that he still mattered. Months later, James walked through the very same streets where he had once sat invisible, but this time his head was high, his step steady. His army jacket had been replaced with a clean shirt and a warm coat, but he carried the same heart, only lighter now, renewed by hope. He had a small apartment of his own, a support group that stood beside him, and a purpose that reached beyond survival. One morning, he stood in front of a room full of veterans, men and women who knew the weight of silence he had once carried. "I know what it feels like to think you've been forgotten," he said, his voice strong, but lined with emotion. "But you are not invisible. You are not alone." The room grew still, every ear tuned to his words. He wasn't just telling his story, he was offering proof that healing was possible, that tomorrow could be different. The little girl and her father often came to visit, their lives forever tied to his. They hadn't just given him food, they had given him back his place in the world. And in return, James devoted himself to lifting others, passing forward the compassion that had saved him. As he helped another veteran fill out paperwork for housing, James thought back to that cold day on the sidewalk. All it took was one small act of kindness to change everything, he reminded himself. And with a quiet smile, he whispered the words he now lived by: "Hope is never lost."